On this episode of 15 Minutes With, we're speaking to Deloitte senior consultant Swathi Rocque on the importance of user-centric design. Swathi explains in practical terms how we manage and how we balance the real-world challenges that we face when user needs and business needs fail to align. Swathi has a unique perspective from her experience in both private and public sector digital delivery projects. Most recently, Swathi has been involved in the COVID-19 response technology commissioned by the UK government.
Hi, Swathi. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello. I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. We're really excited to have you. So, can you tell us a little bit about what user-centric design is?
Yeah, definitely. So user-centric design is more applicable when there is a demand versus supply. When there is a demand from the users, this is where the user-centric gets more important. User-centric has a lot of other derivations. So if you take a user-centric design from the angle of the public sector or from the angle of private sector, it's a bit different, because on the private sector is where the user-centric design closely sit with actual audience and the feedback that comes into the actual use. But on the public sector, it's the same, but there's layers of approvals or things that needs to be done before it reaches out to public. So what I feel is user-centric is really important, because that's where your starting point is to understand what the public needs and what the user needs. But sometimes this can get overridden from the business centric requirement, I would say, because the business will say, okay, user needs this, but we have a budget of this. We wouldn't be able to satisfy the customer demand. So that's when all the ifs and buts and trying to get the ties down comes into picture.
So is it safe to say that two of the biggest hurdles in your experience have been budget and also perhaps attitude of the business, particularly if that's influenced by whether it's private sector or public sector?
Exactly. This is where things start sensing a bit different when you're working. So there might be a product example. So when you take in a private sector, you might have a module or example module that you can sort of envision, and you can start building the user-centric flow, because you're not starting from a blank page here. You know who is the audience and you know who are your competitors. But when you come to a public sector, this is where things is a bit different. You might not have much competitors. No one competes for countries to countries websites or demands. We do a user-centric research, but you wouldn't be necessarily satisfying the end results, because that's where the complexity starts. Yeah, this is a user-centric flow and this goes to approval. By the time you get approval, users could have moved into an advanced stage. I feel it's a very different feel when you work on both the sides and things are treated a bit differently.
Private sector, is that much easier then to get that understanding of the end user? And public sector, do you ever really get a true sense of that audience, particularly, like you say, if there are no real competitors? It must be really, really difficult to get a firm grasp of the user if you're trying to create a user-centric design, be it for a website, be it for an app, whatever it may be for.
Yes, because that's where on the public sector, you start with an empty page. You don't know what the user needs here. You might sort of get the essence, okay, this had worked before. Now we are trying to draw another line. So for example, we have the COVID applications. This is a very peculiar example, because we didn't anticipate that COVID is going to come and hit us in such a bad way. And taking that as an example, it was like an empty page when things got started. The way the progression made was good, but we didn't necessarily have idea how the audience would accept the design or anything that we are trying to research on. And on the other hand, on the private sector, you know the demands. So based on the demand trend, you sort of start picking up, okay, this is what the user needs, and this is what the user has gone through, and this is what the other competitors are doing. So public sector, when you're starting with any new stuff, it's a blank page. You might have some information, but that's not really applicable to the end user. This is where you need to spend a lot of time understanding the audience. And sometimes I don't think this efficiently happens. It happens, but not to an extent of how we do it on the other fence, like on the private sectors.
So is it safe to say that when you kind of compare them, customer experience somewhat takes a back seat to business need, right? We need to gather this information. We want to gather it in this way because that's how we want to look at it. And actually, people need to just figure out how to use it. And it's less about creating a beautiful, friendly experience and go, you know what, you don't have a choice. You have to use this thing, just use it.
Yes, definitely. That's something I would say is like a strong voice that comes out. In private sectors, if you've taken an example of any site, you have for each and every journey, you might get into like a feedback or someone saying virtual hello for you. So for example, you go to an Argo site, you browse for 2 seconds or more than a minute, there might be a pop-up coming. Are you looking out for something? Can we sort of assist you? So this is where like, yeah, the user feels that they're not left alone. There are some helping hands when they're trying to go through their journey, and you can ask for support when needed. But on the other hand, for example, you're filling up something on HMRC or any other forms, you would be lost. You'll have so many questions. So you go to frequently asked question page and you start researching. Taking an example of my experience. So recently I had applied for my extension of my visa application, and visa application extension is such a big work. Like you have almost like 14 pages of forms to fill in, and it's an online form. I was pretty much lost because the questions they asked was somewhere, yes, I do fall under this particular brand or category, but somewhere I was like, what does it mean? Is there any alternative meaning for it? So this is why I had so many questions, and I tried to ring every day to the visa office to clarify my questions, but I was not like a happy customer at the end of the day when I finished my application. So this is where I would say there's a clear difference what you expect from each of these sectors.
That clearly creates an opportunity for people to go, how do we make this a better, more usable experience? Because ultimately, if you do that, theoretically, there's less of a need to have a whole bunch of people sat in a call center answering phones or not answering phones, as the case may be. If you just built a usable, good experience in the first place, you would somewhat mitigate the need to have all these other support systems around it.
Exactly. That's definitely, I think that's something it can be in future implemented, or they can think about it. Because if you just go to any other websites which is owned from the public sectors, you might feel the reviewers. The best thing is I sort of go through the review comments, what the people have added. They could have said, oh, it's not user friendly. I lost my time here. I sort of missed the application. And in fact, I was worried that my application would get rejected because there were so many questions which was uncertain. Like I said, okay, yes, for a couple of questions they asked, and I didn't know the meaning of it. The reason is they hadn't given enough explanation or justification. What does it mean? And the best thing is I somewhere skipped a step and I just went to the final submission. And I realized after skipping the step that, oh God, I missed a step and I'm trying to go back and it says error. So that was like, if I don't sort of go through the step, it means like I'm not applicable to access any NHS funds or stuff, because as a visa application, when you're doing in UK, you got to pay certain amount for NHS, I think, for their facility. So I don't know how exactly it just got missed when I was doing my application. And I was like all over every place trying to call agents, and they're like, the answer what I got from the technical support or the customer support group was like, if you're missed, you just need to wait for a case officer to contact you, and then you can proceed with it. It took almost like 2 months for the case officer to contact me. I was literally lost in that whole process, I would say.
Swathi, I can completely relate to the visa process and all of the un-user-friendly features of it. I mean, it's just a black hole or a rabbit warren of poorly designed, non-user-centric features.
But what's really interesting as well is that both Shelley and I have traveled a lot, right? We've been, and you, Swathi, we've been all over the world.
Yeah.
And it seems to be, well, I certainly haven't come across any government that's gotten this right. Everybody seems to follow the same design idea of let's make it as difficult as humanly possible to lead people into corners. And nobody has thought, actually, why don't we look at what people are doing from an e-commerce point of view and the experience is being built into that and replicate some of that on the other side? To us, we obviously work in the industry. It seems like a really simple thing to do, but for whatever reason, no one's thought about it.
Exactly. I think, yeah, that's where is the actual gap lies in terms of understanding, and I would say it's more like educating the team itself, like the whole public sector. I wouldn't sort of point fingers on the things are working fine here in public sector and in private sector things are a bit different. I would necessarily say, like, when you try to align between the private and public sector, that's where the experience is quite different as individual, what you sort of go through each journey. I wouldn't sort of solutionize things here. I think it's more like an awareness, like if they sort of take a step to understand what the user needs, because user definitely needs the journey to be done pretty well on their public sector. So for example, visa, this is one of the complex thing, and it's a very essential thing rather than me going and buying a product from Gucci on their website. So I want my experience to be well defined, and I shouldn't face any sort of glitch or any back and forth, which I went through. So I think if they had done a bit of user-centric research, they might have got a lot of information, and that could have been fed into the system, and it could have saved people's time, call centers call, and also the back and forth messages or the anxiety. It's like when you don't get any response, that's where you start getting anxious. Oh God, did I do it right? Did I not do it right? So there's a lot of things. It's not just user experience, it's the emotion of the user also is tied into that particular thing. So that can be sort of looked after pretty well. That's what I feel.
And they could have saved a lot of money, right? I mean, it's easy when you look at a project and you measure it upfront and you give it a budget upfront. But like you both touched on earlier, you're not measuring the after effects and all of the knock-on effects as part of that same project. You know, the cost implication of having to open call centers to answer everybody's questions because your own FAQs and user journey is so poor. So Swathi, I wanted to ask you off the back of all of this, what happens when you have to continue, you have to forge on, and the design is being directed in a non-user-centric direction?
That becomes challenging. So as a business analyst or as a, I would say, consultant, it's quite hard when you don't understand what the user needs and you get dictated from business, but that's a challenging. Like every time when you start doing analysis based on what business needs or user needs, you start questioning what is the business impact and what is the user impact. So this is one of the checkpoints that always I tend to ask for the stakeholders understanding, are they trying to drive any business needs here, or is there anything that it benefits the customer? I have been in a situation where it's not user centric, like it's not actually directly applies to user or what features we are doing. It's more like business benefit. This is where complexity starts, because it is okay for business, but when it reaches to the end user, I'm not sure how it will be accepted from the end user. The thing is, there's a couple of things like in experience that I can share. Like there might be a fancy website that we are creating. One of the business users says, oh, Gucci has done that beautiful USB on their website. Can we get that here on our site? But the background of it, we haven't done enough research whether the Gucci's product, the Gucci's website has got that USB. There's more users using it, or what is the traffic, like what is exactly influencing the product, or is it sort of getting some benefit for them? If you sort of blindly copy what the other products have done, this is where the challenge starts. You just borrowed the concept, but you haven't thought about the background of it, whether it is essential for user, yes or no. You haven't researched from your product angle. It might be helpful for Gucci, but not for you, for your website, because it's a different product and it's a different set of customers who's going to use this. So this is where I feel sometimes when businesses dictating what the user needs, sometimes it's misleading. They could have not done enough research. So that's where we need a more of user-centric research, the understanding and the analysis, whether this requirement is really efficient or it fetches value as a team or as a product to our company.
If somebody's going through this process and they're trying to kind of balance this out and they're going, look, this is what the business wants because it looks cool and shiny, and we think we know what our customers want, but we haven't really asked, what sort of tips or advice would you give to anybody going through this process that would put them in the right track and make sure that they don't end up in a situation where they build something that nobody wants to use?
Understand the market demand first. So first understand what your brand is, because you need to understand whether your brand is strong enough in the market, and then understand how the other products actually manage this. I know it's a bit of research that you need to do with your competitors as well. And the next is your user. Understand the types of user that you're targeting. And based on it, you can sort of do a lot of researches. You can send a feedback forms. You can do a survey. You can actually, I remember actually one of our clients just literally standing in a mall with a handout sheets, like asking them to fill up the survey forms. So you have a lot of methods to cover. But the main thing is set your product vision and the audience right. If the product vision and the audience are not right, then I think it's going to be a big failure. You're targeting incorrect or a different audience who are not supposed to be as a part of your target group.
Swathi, thank you so much for your time and your insight. It has been incredible talking to you, and it's been so interesting hearing about the balance between public sector, private sector, and how that influences user-centric attitudes.
Yeah, it's been amazing. And I think if the one takeaway that people get from this is to just think more about their users, we'll be in a much better place.
Exactly. Think more and also try to action it, not just thinking, put it into action.
That was Swathi Rocque, Senior Consultant at Deloitte, speaking to us about user-centric design methods, challenges and insights within private and public sector projects. Swathi shed light on the realities that businesses and digital teams face in order to deliver on both user-led best practice and also tread the fine line that balances this approach with providing short-term gains demanded by stakeholders. To everyone listening, we hope you enjoyed this episode and we look forward to welcoming you next time on 15 Minutes With.